All right, should be good to go, I think. Well, hello everybody. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to come and listen to me rant on about Figma and design. So we'll start off here with a brief introduction. So for those of you who may not know what Figma is or who I am, Figma is a web-based design tool that enables real-time collaboration, interactive prototyping, and streamlined feedback. It helps teams work together seamlessly to maintain design consistency, accelerate the development process by serving as a unified platform for designers, developers, and stakeholders. And why should I be telling you about this? Well, for my previous client, I acted as their UI designer. I was tasked with redesigning their legacy product for the next generation. All right, so kicking things off here, and feel free at any point during this if you have any questions to interrupt me. I might not see it if you raise your hand, so just unmute and speak up, and I can carry back on at any point during this. So moving on here. So collaboration. Figma allows designers, developers, and other stakeholders to collaborate in real time. Everyone can access and comment on the design simultaneously, reducing back and forth communication and improving feedback loops. And since Figma operates in the cloud, there's only one version of the design that everyone is working on. This minimizes confusion around which version is the most up to date. So in my previous project, we often collaborated in the design files all together. So that would be me, developers, stakeholders, product, which really helped us get a narrow vision on what we wanted the product to be and helped us build exactly what the customer wanted, eliminating a bunch of back and forth communication and things of the like. And then moving on, so prototyping. Developers can experience interactive clickable prototypes, kind of like what we're viewing here, that mimic the final product. This helps developers better understand the intended user experience, interaction flows, and it helps reduce misunderstandings. Integrations with developer tools like Zeppelin and plugins that export Figma designs to code, so you can do HTML, CSS, React, etc., will help developers implement the designs more accurately, ensuring the final product is consistent with the design. So prototyping is probably one of the most useful tools in the Figma tool belt. And as a designer, it allows me to design what the product will look like and then convey it to developers or end users, stakeholders to really get that instant feedback of, yes, this is what it should look like. No, this is what it should not look like. And on the development end, prototyping allows the developer to see exactly what, say, a button component or something on the page, a movable element is supposed to do. So for example, I have this component up here and it has what happens when I hover over a button, what happens when I click a button, where does it take me? So these things help eliminate any questions that a developer may have and help accelerate that process a bit more because they can get their hands physically on a mock-up of the product itself. So feedback. Figma allows team members, including developers, designers, and stakeholders, to collaborate and give feedback in real time. Design demos with stakeholders hosted by the designer allow for immediate iteration, ensuring the product is exactly what the customer needs. And feedback during those demos can be placed directly into specific parts of the design. So there's no ambiguity about which section the feedback refers to, and it eliminates misunderstandings and makes the feedback more actionable. So for example, during my time on my previous client, I hosted design meetings frequently with developers and the end users and the customer themselves to show off what my vision of the next generation would be and go through what I had designed to make sure it aligns with their expectations, meets the acceptance criteria from product, and aligns with the development effort we intended to put in for a specific feature area, making sure that I didn't blow out the scope or that the customer understood what the scope was when they finally saw the product itself in front of them. And we were able to take that feedback and sometimes instantly design on the fly. So during that meeting, I was able to change, say, something like a button color or how something moved from one place to another, eliminating any sort of miscommunication down the line of what something should look like. So saving on that development time by having something exactly as the customer would expect. So as you can imagine, that would improve consistency. So Figma allows for the creation of design systems with reusable components. This can include buttons, icons, modals, pop-ups, pages, anything that you could really imagine could be componentized. This ensures design consistency and speeds up the design and development process, since developers can reuse those components without rebuilding them from scratch. When global styles like fonts or colors are updated in Figma, they automatically update everywhere in the project unless you specifically tell it not to. This ensures that design changes propagate throughout the entire design system, keeping everything in sync. So this is probably another of the most important things here are components. So the ability to create a library of buttons, of modals, pop-ups, alerts, anything that may be used in the product, I could create as a component. And essentially that means I have, for example, buttons up here. And again, they have hover states, clickable states. And as a developer, you could go in and inspect these objects through the dev mode in Figma and see exactly what the colors on these things are supposed to be, what happens when you hover over them, and translate that out into code. So anything from padding or font sizes, it just gives you all the behavior. And if it's made as a component in Figma, I can translate that easily to all of the pages where that button may be used. So there's no guesswork as to if there's a new page, what that button's going to look like or how that button's going to behave, because it's consistent throughout the entire design system. So what does this all cost? So there are a couple of different plans here. When I was acting as the UI designer, was on a professional license, as were the developers. So a professional license is what gives you access to dev mode and allows you to create multiple pages. There is a free version, which is useful for anybody who wants to get in there, get their feet wet, or maybe for a less intensive design process, something for mockups. There's also an organization or an enterprise level. I don't have experience with those, but I figured I'd include them here just for everybody's information. So I'll go ahead and take a moment and pause here and give you time to look over this one, and then just ask if anybody has any questions. We can maybe go back and revisit something before we continue on. All right, I'm assuming there's no questions. And if anybody has any questions about pricing, all of this information can be accessed on their website. So just figma.com. I think I don't know.
Matt, this is Sandy.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Do we have, I assume we have a license at Solution Street. Is it just certain people, or we have so many seats or something?
We do not currently have a license with Solution Street. So we had a license, or I think we still have a license on the client, but that's with the client themselves. Solution Street doesn't have its own license at this time.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Matt, do you want to mention anything with the link to being able to put the designs into the tickets?
Yep. So that you're jumping ahead in my presentation, Carolyn.
Oh, I'm sorry. Never mind.
No, that's perfect. So we can definitely get into that now. So one of the things that I hope and I think everybody found extremely useful on a previous project of mine is Figma can link directly to Jira tickets. So in the ticket itself, when say you as a developer would get something come across your board, can see the designs in the ticket itself, and you can click in, zoom in, do what you need to do within its own kind of embedded window in the Jira ticket. So you don't have to go anywhere else, and you don't have to find where the designs are. They can be added directly to the ticket you're working on. Thank you, Carolyn.
Hey, Matt, can I add something to that?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so one thing that was really cool about that too is it does embed in the Jira ticket and you can see it and zoom in, but it's also scoped to the specific component. So if you want to actually get into Figma to see it and like use more of the tooling in Figma, you click and there's basically a link that pulls it up and then zooms in to the exact location in the Figma doc that maps to the thing that was essentially in the Jira ticket. So it's really cool.
Time savers all around. All right, I'll go ahead and move on here. So the next thing I thought we could do is a little demo. So we've covered some of the things that Figma can do. Let's put it together in practice. We'll make a button component or maybe some other things and show off how these things can save on development time. So I'll switch gears here a little bit out of the prototype, and we will go over to the design itself. So this is what you'd be looking at as a developer, designer, somebody in product, or maybe even a stakeholder for getting access into a design. Essentially, you would have different pages that are masquerading as desktops. You could do mobile sizes by adding a frame into it, and you would be able to inspect these pages and their objects all together as you worked through. So I thought it would be interesting together to flush out this component here. You may have noticed we had this button on the screen. It did not have any of that hover capability or clickable capability. I mean, you could click it, but it didn't look like it pressed by in any capacity. So I figured it could be interesting to do that and then show off how that propagates throughout the entire design system, and then how we could prototype this page, which was some feedback from Stephen and Matt on things that they found useful as with Figma and with my time as their designer. And since I don't have access to it right now, I also included a screenshot of what the developer mode looks like, so you all can kind of take a look at it and digest what this could offer you. But as I said, I don't currently have a professional license, so I can't click and navigate you through all of that. All right, so let's go ahead and begin. So some of the things that are useful or interesting to note. So this is essentially what I used as the design system, or the template I used for the design system that was for my previous client. So we had things like colors, fonts, and all their different weights. These things were all put into a library, so they would be accessible anywhere in the system. So say if a user clicked into a button or a developer clicked into a button, they would be able to see that all of the primary buttons were this shade of blue, this 700 shade of blue. And then they were able to put that into the code and put all of these colors as they are into the code and know that they could rely that anything that was in the system was in respect to something that was in this palette here. So there was never any ambiguity about what color is something, what's the hex value of this object. It was always consistent with what these values were set here from the beginning of the project. So from the get-go, we were able to establish that right away. And then these were the different combinations of those colors. So for buttons, modals, pop-ups, etc., these were taken into account for accessibility. So again, as a developer, you would know that if a button were to be this color, the text would be this color on top of it. All right, and then just to show off some of the stuff with components before we get into making one of our own, we have, I took some of these from the material library. So you'll see if I click into this, a bunch of stuff pops up over here in my design panel with different options. So let's say I had a frame, and this frame was going to be a simple site, and I just wanted maybe a button on it, and I can change the size of it here. So one of the fun things or cool things about it being a component, let's say now I wanted 2 of these. So I've created 2 different sites. If I come in here to the main one and I update the color, you'll see that the color is now purple for all of these. So I can change things on the main component. I can also push from the child to the main component. I could detach the instance if I needed to. So I have complete control over where things are consistent throughout the design system and where I can break things in the design system. I'm also able to change things like, say I wanted an icon next to it. Say I wanted the hover state, or if it was focused. So there's a ton of things you can do when you start playing with components that you can give you that at a glance look at what a button or what a component on a page is supposed to do that could be helpful for a developer. Let's go ahead and make our own. So I've got this here, which should be shared across all of these pages. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make it a variant. And let's say we'll add 3. different variants. So I have 3 of these buttons here, and let's say just for fun, we wanted the hover of this to change it to this light blue. And on click, we wanted it to be a dark blue. And this won't look beautiful on every page because of the colors here. If I really wanted it to, I would do something of this nature where I just change the shading of it. But I figure this would stand out a bit more. So in order to make these into a component, which, well, they already are a component, but in order to make this function, we need to give it some different names. So you'll see I've got default, variant 2, variant 3. So this is our inactive state. We'll call this hover. And we'll call this pressed. So now I can go into prototype, and I would essentially drag from here. So on click, I will change the property to hover, but I don't want it to be on click. I want it to be while hovering. So while hovering, it will change to hover, smart animate, and it creates all the animations for you. And then when I click on this hovered one, I want it to change to pressed. So now if I come in to the prototype, you'll see this updates, and I can go through, and everywhere this button was, it now updates throughout the entire design system. So now as a developer, you could come in and say you were tasked with building this page, and you see this button for the first time. You now have access to, if you were in the dev mode, you could see active, you could toggle it to see what it was supposed to be with hover, pressed, and get all of those buttons values immediately. So you don't have any ambiguity about what that's supposed to look like, and it stays consistent across any page in which that button may be referenced. Any questions so far? All
Hey, Matt,
right.
this is
Yeah.
Matt Smith. When
Mhm.
you're deciding the colors on these, you mentioned the color library that you're able to choose from. So I saw you chose through the color palette in order to change the color of that button. Do you have can you say, hey, here's all my buttons colors I have saved in the project for this project. Can I just choose from one of those as opposed to having to choose through the whole color wheel there?
Yep, absolutely you can. So the little 4 buttons here, you can see the libraries. So you can see any colors that I have predetermined in the system. So let's say, for example, I wanted it to be, let's pick something.
So you could name it
Yeah,
next
like
button,
these. Yes,
and
you could
that would
name
be
it
that color.
anything you want to, but let's say I wanted it to be primary 35. It updates to primary 35. And then now if I look at it, you see the library location instead of just the color itself. And if you ever needed information about the color itself, you just go into the library and you can see exactly what that color is. So you
Right.
can store, for example, I use these values, and with my previous client, you can store all of these in a library so they can be easily referenced anywhere in the product and for any button, component, page that you would want to create or inspect.
So you, in theory, never have to use the color wheel again. You're always going to be picking a color that belongs to the palette that you created.
Correct. Yeah, unless there's some new requirements or anything that would make me add to this library. For anything that's existing or should exist within this wheelhouse, you would never be dragging that little dot around or guessing as to what the exact text value of that is, because it would be contained within the library and then also reflected in the code.
Great.
All right, so let's go ahead and add our now purple button. So I'll actually take it from this screen and we'll put it over here. And let's just make it look kind of pretty. And I'll take this component, bring it onto this one, and let's just add this feedback page into our design here. So let's say now I know I need another button in this component. I'll just add another one, and that's not how you spell comments. There we go. Nope, I can't type today. Okay, spell check for the win. All right. So we've added our last button here. Let's go ahead and propagate this everywhere else. So I can just shift click anywhere. There's also ways to search for it and have them all highlight and update them simultaneously, but I'm just doing it this way because it's easy enough. And I'll replace them. So now I've got comments over here. And let's prototype it. So these maintain their values as to where they would navigate to. But let's take, so from demo, we'll take this comments one and just bring it on over to here. And we need another one of those buttons on the demo screen. All right, so now we've linked this comments button and this button here to the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and restart the prototype. Let's go ahead and go to demo. We should be able to go to comments. This is acting strange, so we can fix that in a second. But essentially, we've now linked this button to the screen. So we've implemented this over, and these maintain their ability to hover and click. Some of them might have to be edited just from the way we copied it out and in, but we can change that in the future. But I figured I'd pause here now that we've added this page to the prototype with just some of the feedback that Stephen and Matt had for you all to look at and just see how it compares to some of the things that I were talking about. So you can see that Stephen mentioned the Figma links in Jira tickets and how that's useful, and that components are useful to display variations of an element. And Matt had mentioned some things about being able to add color palettes and fonts to the code, makes it so there's no margin for error and that everything is consistent. And when things are componentized, devs can build exact representations of those things, which is perfect for a junior engineer or an onboarding employee. So if you've ever had situations in which you're freshly coming onto a project, having a Figma design or having a designer that's using Figma can really speed up the onboarding process, because you as a developer would know by looking at the design essentially exactly what you need for, say, a button component, and then all of those things would be reflected in the existing code library. So again, for things like color, font weight, elevation, shadows, all of those things should be static throughout the entire system once set up by the designer. So if you're just getting into a new project and those things are in place for you, it could make your life that much easier. But, all right, and I'll go ahead and just for a quick second here, bring up what the developer mode could look like for you all. So you see if you inspect a component here, you can see all the information about it. So any of its variant information, you could see dev resources, things like code. So this one, in this example, it's representing CSS, but you can see the padding, border radius, the colors here, and then any of the CSS information and styling, any interactions that I set up for the prototype. So this would be any of the things that I created to animate those things. So again, that would help a developer understand when, say, a button is clicked, it moves to the top of the page. This is where that information would be housed. So you could see exactly how a button is supposed to look after interacted with, or how a component is supposed to look after interacted with, not necessarily only a button. You could see any assets that make up that component. And then as we had talked about, any colors from the library or outside of the library that may be involved with that component. And then also the ability to export something directly to an SVG. So that's useful for things like logos, icons, anything that requires that vector-like outline of something. It's extremely easy to go ahead and export something. So let's say I had an icon. I'm just going to pull one from a library. And I wanted to take this icon and add it to my project. I would just come to export, SVG, export it, and then you're done. And that's how you could get all the logos, all the icons, or anything you would need for your project imported directly into the code. But that's about all I have. Any questions, or does anybody want to see anything specific with Figma and its use before I start wrapping things up?
What about adding icons from different locations, different, maybe some clip art or something you find online? Is it easy enough to do that too?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, these friends here, these little animated GIFs were all found online, and essentially I just copy pasted them into this frame. So if you did need to use anything from online, you could just copy and paste it in
Does it
easily.
does it work with sampling down? Like, let's say you've got a really high resolution image that you want to use, but you obviously don't want something that large in here. Does it have kind of that element of, like, I'm thinking of Photoshop when you save something as a lesser quality.
I don't know that it has that capability within Figma itself. I haven't toyed around with something like that, but you could definitely take an image, reduce the quality, and then just use it in Figma, however you would normally do that. But I don't know that there's a native way to say, oh, this is an 8K image, and I would like it to be 1080p or something. I don't know the details of all of that within Figma, but you could definitely make that change and then just upload it into Figma as a regular image. So, and most of the time I would say, as a designer, I wouldn't want to just take clip art or something from the internet and add it into Figma. Normally for things like images or vectors, I would want to create them myself. However, I definitely think there are use cases in which things will be pulled from like a library, something like I was displaying here. That's not created by me. So for things like this is materials, all of materials icons, and I could use them as I needed to. Or for example, I think we've looked at some of these before, but just these fun 3D vector shapes, if I ever wanted to use them in a project, it's easy enough for me to just copy them from this library and just add it here.
And all those shapes, like that shape, that's all within Material UI's work, or is that all within Figma?
This is just all within Figma, so it has a community section. If I come up to this little world icon that you could search for almost anything you need. So say I needed buttons, I could search and you'd get a bunch of different options with buttons, some paid, some free, but you could come in here and look at what maybe somebody else had created, click open in Figma, and then essentially see the different buttons and then copy them into your project.
Cool. I see Ed's got his hand up.
Yep. Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, so these kind of tools aren't my wheelhouse, so this might be a dumb question, but I'm wondering if Figma competes with or complements tools like Balsamiq. It looks like Figma is a much more complete solution. And so my question would be, can you import Balsamiq mockups into Figma to develop them further? And last question is, how much does an individual license cost?
Sure. So I'll start with a license question. An individual license, so assuming you're wanting a professional one, is $15 a seat a month, and there is an annual plan to that. I don't know the exact price, but it would be whatever that is times
Okay.
an annual amount and 20% off. I don't have that quick math available in my head, but the monthly would be 15. And then for Balsamiq, so essentially I've always understood Balsamiq to be more of a wireframing tool. You can wireframe in Figma, and if you have a Balsamiq design, so it really depends on how you export it, how customizable it would be in Figma, but you could definitely export the design, say, as a PDF, or if the components could be exported as an SVG, then they'd be able to be edited in Figma directly. But you could definitely export a design from Balsamiq and import it as, say, an image or depending on what the levels of export that Balsamiq would provide, I think would determine whether or not it would be importable into Figma as something editable out the box. So I don't know that interaction well enough to give you sound advice on it, other than you could definitely take what is in Balsamiq, add it to Figma, and then iterate on it. But I don't know the level of which it would directly translate, if that makes sense.
Yep, that makes sense. Thanks.
Of course.
This is Matt. Can I add something?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So, and I'm the Matt, I think, that he's been referring to that worked with him. So I have some context. Some other things that were super useful, kind of like building on with what he said. And I'm sure as a developer, everyone's experienced this, where you'll get some sort of like rough mock-up, you know, like an image essentially of, like, let's say like a pop-up modal. And how often you kind of have to fiddle with, like, you've got like essentially a screenshot and you're fiddling with, you know, paddings, margins, border radiuses, shadows, and essentially just experimenting to try to make it look like an image, right? And this whole concept here, like he mentioned, is you can take, you know, you physically click on it and it gives you the exact CSS to make it look exactly like it looks, right? And one of the advantages there is, like, a lot of the times, you know, like, you'll get a page and it'll be like, oh, you need this modal pop-up. And a lot of engineers will then, you know, you'll build a modal pop-up and then all of a sudden you'll come like a week or two later and there's another modal in another screenshot that looks almost like the last one, but is slightly different. So this whole concept kind of gets you to focus more on components too. So instead of thinking of, like, on this page, I need this pop-up, you start thinking, I need a pop-up for my site. What does my pop-up look like? What is the CSS that will apply to all of these pop-ups? Are there secondary colors, you know, like an alternative where it's like a warning version? And then you start getting approval on concepts like tool tips, pop-up modals, and you start getting approval in that manner. So then the next time you need one, there's no debate about what it is. All it is what's the text, what's the header, and what kind of buttons are inside of it. So you end up building the actual application based off of the concept that started that early and got approval on big concepts, rather than this page needs an approval and then approving a page.
Yeah, it becomes more like putting together the pieces of a puzzle instead of designing the puzzle and then trying to put together the pieces while the puzzle's already kind of been told to you, if that makes sense. But thank you, Matt. Anything else from anybody? All right, I will take that as a no. So that's really about all I have here. If anybody has or ever has any questions or wants to get a private walkthrough of Figma or see anything or even play with it yourself, if you encounter areas that you have questions about, let me know. I guess one other interesting thing to note that you can see. Let me see if it'll be kind to me right now. You can see. Oh, I mean, that's add to version history. And Matt, this might be useful, Stephen, Carolyn, to you all. You can go into the file and show the version history of something. So say I wanted to go back to what it was before I did any of that work, I could click into when I saved it as the final project and see kind of through time how these have developed. So you can have version control within Figma itself to see, say, different designs. So say as a developer, if you ever needed to see where something started to how we got to the end result we got to, you could go back in time and see all of the iterations of that design and maybe see why we made some of the decisions we made to shore up your confidence in the designs. So that's maybe the last thing that I wanted to touch on before we wrapped up. But as I was saying, if anybody has any questions or if you get in there and play with it yourself and get stuck or want to see if you can do something, I'm always available. So feel free to reach out to me for questions like these. I love to work with Figma and talk about design. So if you have anything, feel free to approach me at any time, and I'd be happy to chat it out with you. But if there's nothing else, that's about all I have. So I'll be able to share out this prototype to anybody who wants it. We also have the recording, but that's about it. So, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them now. But thank you all for joining.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Matt.
Thank you. Great job.
Thank you.